So we're going to hear from our three homeowners today, and each of them live in North Campus Village. And so let's take a look, first of all, at this place where they live. It's not the only, by any stretch of the imagination, the only Maharishi Vastu community. We see on the screen one in North Carolina. Heavenlymountain.net is the URL for it. We see one in Suffolk, England, right now on the screen. There are many around Fairfield and in Maharishi Vedic City. And one example is Mandala One Village, which we see on the screen. And there are others in other parts of the world. There will be more soon. Here are renderings of the next Maharishi Vastu community, Mandala Village, at mandalavillage.com, which will be starting construction in 2021 in Vero Beach, Florida, with about 200 residences plus offices and community functions, a real community. But today we're going to focus on North Campus Village, which is co-developed by Vastu Partners LLC and DRB Contracting Inc. If you want to learn more about it, you are welcome to reach out to Don Langstaff, dlangstaff at vastupartners.com. They have a website at vastupartners.com. And now let us take a look at an aerial view of North Campus Village, a drone shot which was filmed very recently. This is the single family residential part of it that we're seeing in the center right now and on the left. And now we are seeing the more recent phases of it, which are townhouses, 2 and 3 units per building. And now we are seeing the newest phase, phase 6, larger townhouses, which are now well underway, and more will be built directly in front of them. And here we have a look back at the entire community of North Campus Village and the surrounding countryside, including a beautiful reservoir to the east. And as we see now, it is immediately north of the campus of Maharishi University of Management and the Golden Domes in MIU. So those who live at North Campus Village who meditate in the domes are able to walk easily. It's very convenient. And so now we're first going to hear from Allie Turner. And before we actually hear from Allie, I am going to show a few slides of her apartment. Here we see Allie's dining room. Another view of it. Allie's living room. And her kitchen. And with that, let's hear from Allie. Thanks for joining us, Allie. So how long have you lived in Vastu, and have you lived in Vastu in more than one place?
Yes, yeah. I have lived in Vastu, in this particular Vastu, since May of this year. So I guess 5 months now. And before that, I've lived in Vastu in a number of different places. Around this time last year, I began a 6-month course in Thailand, actually, on a Vastu training campus, an educational campus. And that was a really wonderful experience on the other side of the world in Vastu. And then when I came back, I spent a week with a friend actually in North Campus Village. So Vastu right here, where I am now. And then I I spent a little bit of time in Vastu in Southern California as well. So I've had a variety of experiences, but so far I've loved living in North Campus Village. It's definitely been my favorite of all of them. So it's lovely.
And tell us a little bit about your experience. You have an unusual experience in that you have moved into Vastu and then presumably temporarily back into non-Vastu and then back into Vastu more than once. And so you may have a better experience than most of us of going into Vastu and then out and then back in. So first of all, what are the things that you notice most about Vastu? And then let's come back and talk about the contrast.
Great. Yeah. Living in Vastu, I've definitely noticed, I would say, an elevation in the quality of my life. That's the best way for me to put it, is that all areas of my life are elevated, are slightly improved, are brighter or happier or healthier. I find I have more energy and more productivity. I've been working from home a lot, of course, with COVID, and I'm able to get my work done more efficiently, more effectively. I have greater ambition also. I feel perhaps that the things that I want in my life are clearer to me, and then I'm able to take the proper actions to achieve those goals more quickly and more effectively. So that's the biggest thing I've noticed just in these last 5 months here. The contrast for me has been that when I'm not living in Vastu, I feel myself wanting to get back into Vastu. So I did spend a week or 2 weeks here and there between those different places that I mentioned, the different Vastu locations I was living in, where I was not in Vastu. Perhaps it was like an east-facing house, but it wasn't proper Vastu. And I felt myself wanting to be in Vastu again. And in most cases, I knew I would be in Vastu soon. However, when I returned to Fairfield from California, shortly after COVID hit, I had moved there for work and wasn't able to work. So I decided to come back to Fairfield, home base. And I spent a couple of weeks with a friend in his home. And I began looking at apartments in this area, but I couldn't bring myself to rent anywhere that wasn't Vastu. I just knew I wanted to be in Vastu again. So when I found this place, I was very thrilled, and I feel very lucky to be here.
Very, very interesting. In the literature on Vastu, there are 5 areas that it is claimed that Maharishi Vastu homes affect in our lives. One of those is our health, physical and mental. And speaking to you as somebody probably in your 20s, usually when we're at that age, we're in good health all the time and not much makes much of an impact on it. The second area is happiness. And the third is family harmony. The fourth is success. And the fifth is growth to enlightenment. You have spoken in the last few minutes about the effects upon what we could call success, upon your productivity and your work. And have you innocently seen any impact on any of the other 4 areas of your life?
Yeah, certainly. It's funny you mentioned health, because I actually have noticed my health improving since I've been living in Vastu. It feels like once I was in Vastu for an extended period of time, I noticed this gradual trajectory towards greater health. Not just that I felt better, I felt more energized, I was sleeping better, all of those things are true, but that I had more desire to take better care of myself. And I was able to take the actions and modify my behaviors in a way that is supportive of that and that improvement of my health. So it comes from inside and outside, I guess, is the best way I can put it in terms of health. Happiness has definitely improved. I can't speak much on family life. I live by myself. But I think also I do meditate regularly. So on the topic of, I guess, spiritual growth, I would find that my meditations are much clearer, much deeper, more blissful, and more enjoyable. So all of those areas are brightened by living in Vastu.
Thank you, Allie. This is a lovely insight into one person's experience living in and out of Vastu. Thank you very much, and please stay on. We may have some questions for you later in the webinar. I understand that you may have to turn your video off, and so please go right ahead anytime that you need to.
Thank you.
Let us now look at the apartment that Luke Hillis is renting. Here we are. It looks like a house, but the upper story is an apartment. It is in the style of arts and crafts, craftsman cottages as were built in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. This, though, was built 100 years later, and it allows us to appreciate that the principles of Maharishi Vastu architecture are deep principles that are compatible with almost every style of architecture, including a variety of our commonly used styles of home design today. And here we see Luke's living room and maybe also dining and maybe even a little corner of his bedroom. And so with that, Luke.
Yes.
Welcome. And
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your history of living in and out of Vastu.
Sure. Yeah. I've bounced back and forth between Vastu and non-Vastu because I come from a family that values Vastu. So a fair amount of my growing up was in Vastu. But when I moved out of home, then I would go different places, like elements of my college experience, or also I've done some travels. And then I would come home and be back in Vastu and then be out of Vastu. And most recently, I've been in Vastu since August of last year, living in the home that you were showing.
And what is your general experience of any contrast that there might be between being in Vastu and out of Vastu?
Sure. I thought a little bit ahead of this webinar what I wanted to share with you and those who are listening. And the phrase and the idea I came up with is blissfulness of being. And let me unpack that a little bit. So basically, blissfulness for me is a state of contentment and kind of like not necessarily happiness, but just joyousness at a sort of a subtle level. Like I'm just content, I'm happy. And then being for me is the state of not really doing anything. So when I'm in a Vastu, I feel like I'm already content and happy even before I'm doing anything. This is different than feeling like I need to turn on some music or I need to do something or put on a movie or I need to have friends, that there's some external need for that contentment or joy or happiness. But in a Vastu, it's like that's already the baseline state for me. I just sit on the couch and I feel good, or doing something that I wouldn't even normally enjoy, like cooking. It's like, well, it's kind of enjoyable to cut the zucchini because just the act of being is already its own fulfillment. And then for me, when you add that onto something like my work, for example, I sit down at the computer and it's like the headquarters are all alive and ready. It's like I sit down at the computer and I can't wait to jump into the work. Even stuff like taxes, it's fun to figure out the details of it because the state of experience is already blissful in its own nature. For me, I remember when I first moved into this Vastu where I've been living, I remember going to sleep my first night and just feeling like it was like I laid down, and how do I even capture the experience in words? It just felt very clear. I think that's the best word choice I can use. I felt very clear laying down, feeling the bed, feeling the pillow, feeling the room, feeling the space. And I slept great. And then I wake up and feel clear waking up. That element of clarity I want to share also. It's an element of clarity. It's like my mind is clear, my body is clear, my thinking is clear, my relationships are clear, if I have somebody over, that element of blissfulness of being is there for both of us. So the conversation is so much more enjoyable because we're not dependent on each other to feel good. We already feel good. And then everything we create together is on top of that. So I think to summarize all of this, I feel like being in Vastu, it just raises the fundamental atmosphere of everything that happens in the home, so that you don't have to work at being happy. You don't have to work at being clear. You don't have to work at being content. It's already there. And then everything that you apply yourself to is just raising the energy from that place forward.
Thank you, Luke. That was extremely articulate. I could hardly think of any question that I could ask you to draw out anything that we haven't just heard from you. But I will ask you one question. We have now a very vivid sense of what your day-to-day experience is socially, being by yourself, being at work while you're in Vastu. And you have also lived in non-Vastu for various periods of time. In addition to this description of this kind of magical state of existence that you have while you're in Vastu, what can you say about the contrast between that and living outside of Vastu?
Sure. Well, the most basic implication is that living outside of Vastu is not like that. But I'll give a little bit more detail. That I think, and this isn't to say that, I can't live outside of Vastu. That would be a deterioration of my own ability to be self-sufficient. But if I have the choice, I would definitely choose Vastu. And how I would describe the difference, looking at it from the other direction, what is non-Vastu like in comparison to Vastu? I think the word dry is the best single word I could use. That there's a dryness to it. It's like what? I sit down to do work and it's just more work. Like I have to push more, or I lay down to go to sleep and I'm just kind of not relaxed the same way. I'm cooking food and it's annoying instead of blissful. What are some, and also I feel like the walls of non-Vastu are tighter than the walls of Vastu. And I'm not actually referring to the physical space. I'm referring to the energetic experience of being in the space. That somehow being in non-Vastu is more like crawling through a cave. It's like the walls are right there. And being in a Vastu is more like being outdoors. It's like the walls aren't there. So those are a couple of characterizations I would say about, I'd say non-Vastu has more of an element of dryness and more of an element of congestion. And these are both on the energetic level, not on the physical level.
This is very, very interesting. And it conforms to the experience that we know the founder of Maharishi Vastu, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, described about moving into Vastu himself for the first time, when he described that it was, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty close, that the walls of the house did not restrict the flow of his consciousness. And I think, Luke, you have described the same experience, but in your own words. Beautiful, Luke. And next we will hear from Emily Kelly. And Emily, before we hear from her, we're going to have a look at your house that you and Brian built. And here we see the house from the outside. And like many of the houses in North Campus Village, it is in the style of a traditional American house, perhaps one that had been built 100 years ago, but like the other houses, this was actually built within the last 15 years. And Emily has done a beautiful job of landscaping, particularly with native grasses, and we see that in the foreground. And the entrance coming up to the house and framed by the grasses are Emily's beloved late cat, who is making a greeting to us. And one principle of Vastu is that we recommend that we live surrounded by the beauty of nature. And this is an element which has been validated, as have many of the other elements of Vastu, through good published medical research in the last 2 decades, that being able to see the beauty of nature has an uplifting effect upon people's psychology, no surprise. And if in a hospital, they actually recuperate more quickly. And Emily has done a beautiful job of landscaping her yard, so she has that experience. And now we go into the house. We're actually seeing almost precisely the view that is the backdrop behind Emily at this moment. So she may be able to tell us a little more about it. And a look at Emily and Brian's living room. Emily, do you want to jump in and unmute yourself? And do you have anything you might want to say about your living room? I remember in the earlier version of this webinar you did.
Yeah, it's interesting. When this house was built, to tell you the truth, I just so much wanted to be in Vastu that I really didn't think so much as how the house was going to look. We both just wanted to do that. And so the developers just sort of, it started to come together. We would come every night after, meditation in the dome, and come and drive by and take a look at it. And it was just sort of a magical thing, the way it came together, exactly what I loved it. And it was just wonderful. And it continued to do that, even when I didn't think I could figure out how, like this living room, I looked at it and I thought, how am I ever going to furnish this? It just didn't make sense to me. But once it was done and my mother gave me her furniture, everything fit. It's kind of like there's a bit of magic in Vastu homes, at least I find it, where you're just always kind of things sort of fit and happen, and there's more of a flow. And I got to begin to believe that because it happened, not the other way around. It wasn't because of my beliefs. I just found that, well, it'll work out, or something better is coming, and it's happened all the time. And that's kind of what I consider a magical thing about living in Vastu. It's just it's sort of like a law of nature is getting untapped or understood, and it's very lively in the house. This house feels much more lively than all the other homes I've lived in.
Thank you. Very, very articulate and insightful, Emily. Let's quickly see the rest of your apartment, and then we'll let you fill the screen. The dining area of your kitchen, I believe.
Yes, and pantry. Yeah.
And here we see the dining room, kitchen beyond, and living room beyond. I earlier complimented Emily. I know that she's a very talented graphic designer. I've seen her work over many years. And I admired the interior design of this apartment. And then she insisted that she had very little to do with it, which I think is probably understatement. It has a really beautiful feeling. The colors are extremely harmonious.
Well, if I could break in here, actually, I really didn't. My sister lives down the street, and she has a Vastu home, and her colors, she is a really good interior designer. And so I just took all the colors that she has and I really like them. They're wonderful. They're wonderful.
Terrific.
And I consider my style early relative. A lot of it comes from my relatives.
And your office. And I think I will stop sharing screen. I think this is the last photo. Let's make sure. Oh, yes, also a little bit of enclosed outdoor living. Let's go back to the office. I will stop sharing this, and then you will take center stage. And since we just saw a photo of your office, tell us to start about working in Vastu.
it's fabulous. It's some interesting thing that I have found has happened is the way I think has seemed to change. And it kind of surprises me all the time. All my life, I just wanted to be involved in graphic design, and the business I had for many years involved that in a big way. And then we moved into Vastu, and some strange things started to happen. All these things that I never thought I'd have any interest in whatsoever have all of a sudden become very interesting to me. And from that, different professions and businesses have come about. I've learned through another avenue just a little bit about electrical work and science of how electricity works, something that would have never interested me before. And now I think, gee, if I was, 20 years old, it would be really fun to become an electrical engineer. Who would have thought that? So I'm just wondering, where is this coming from? Especially being, older, all these things. And I keep coming up with different things that I'm interested in, which is very surprising to me because it was never there before. I don't know it's from Vastu, but I do notice my thinking it's very different in being there's a lot of clarity in some levels, and it seems to pour out. Not completely from me, but it opens up some channels. And that's always a great surprise. I really appreciate it.
Beautiful, Emily. And it's not unusual that people find that they have more channels of creativity expressing themselves when they move into Vastu. And we heard a little bit of that from Luke and Ali also. And tell me, as they have, what were the things that in the early weeks and months emerged in your awareness by way of contrast when you first moved into Vastu?
Oh, it's a feeling. It's so hard to express in a way, but there's a warmth and a feeling of, someone once said, you never feel you're alone almost in a Vastu house. And I find that there's a liveliness where I just feel, I'm always very sensitive to how a house feels. We've all gone to houses where we feel, even though it could be a totally beautiful house and it doesn't feel comfortable. And then you go to maybe a house that's very plain or something, but it just feels right. And with my Vastu house, there's just something that it feels like an extension of me in some way. And there's a great deal of almost like being hugged. I can't explain it. I was trying to think about this feeling, explaining it today, but it's just, I feel at home, and that's with a big H. And it's like when I go into the meditation room and meditate, I feel like that's my place. And when I come into my office, this is where I work, and it's my place. Everything, and of course my husband has his place, but his place as well. We structured our house so that we have actually 3 apartments. And my husband has one that he uses for his business. I use mine for mine. And then we have an apartment upstairs that we share. And we also figure that, someday we'll also rent out the 2 apartments and just live upstairs. But there's working and living here is fabulous. And I could stay at home all the time. I just love it. It's very nourishing. Nourishing is a good word, I think.
Beautiful. Thank you, Emily.
Emily, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the experience of being in North Campus Village and its presence as a village and community, and what you've noticed about that.
That's the best part of it. I don't think I will ever move from here. I have no desire to, unless it was to, Vero Beach looked good, that, that what you talked about earlier for part of the year. But there's something about this village that is so sweet. We all live in Vastu, so we have this commonality of our goals in a way, though everybody is different. I mean, it's not like we all think alike. It's a lot of different types of people, nationalities, races, ages, views. It's very interesting, but there's all this one common thing at a very basic level. And so, as Luke had mentioned, that one of the best things is summertime and spring walks at night. Lots of people come out to walk. And if my husband and I have to, like, we go up to get the mail or something, he says, now remember, we don't stop. Because it's really, you walk a few feet and then you end up seeing a good friend and you start talking. But at nighttime, I just love it when it gets dark and you're walking past all of the townhouses, and every house you're looking in, and we all know each other. It's a real community. And many of us have known each other for a long time, but we've never all lived together. And you just look in there and it's fabulous. I don't know, it just warms my heart, and it has from the very beginning. And it was interesting that when we first moved here, we were basically out in a field with only one house in front of us, a few houses in the distance. And I thought, this is great. We've got all this property around us. But that didn't last too long. About 3 years later, they started building near us. And at first I thought, oh no, the neighborhood's going to get crowded and we're going to have people here and this and that. But then as the house began to form, I just felt, wait a minute, this is kind of cool. And then when the people moved in, I really felt, and it surprised me because I don't usually, I'm pretty practical, but I felt that something more was happening, that it was like more consciousness. It was a supportive thing. And ever since then, I really have started, I look forward to the more houses, the better it is. And and now we're surrounded by houses, and it's great. It is just great. I love all the people. And I always say that we've got a stellar neighborhood, and it's just getting more stellar all the time. So it's great. It's really a village. It's a community.
That sounds really special.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Allie or Luke, would you like to comment at all on the same topic?
I can go ahead and say something. Just following from the point about the village being a village, I have really loved living here because I find that no matter what time of day it is, where I'm going, what I'm doing, if I'm coming into the neighborhood or I'm just going on a walk or leaving or whatever it may be, I always see someone I know. And that feeling of always seeing someone you know creates this sense of a social community. It creates a sense of warmth and a family feeling. And even though, as I mentioned, I live alone and I have friends who don't live in North Campus Village, it's nice to have people you know living right around you in every house, in every apartment, and to know that if I needed something, there would be someone there, and that there's always someone to chat with, always someone to talk to share some story with, or some bliss, or to notice the stars together. And that experience has been so wonderful just to have. In our modern world, we don't get this, we don't get the feeling of closeness in communities the way that perhaps we used to. And I think that in Fairfield, and especially in North Campus Village, we're very lucky to have that, and I'm enjoying it very much.
Luke?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to comment on what it's like to be in North Campus Village specifically, which is another step outside of just the Vastu home that I live in. But the question is, what's it like to be in a village of Vastu homes? And a few different kind of memories and experiences come to my mind. One of them that really characterizes my experience of being in North Campus Village is what Emily was referring to, of going for walks at night. There's something in North Campus Village, they don't have any street lights, which means that the sky is very clear and that element of clarity is lively at night. So I'd go for walks on these summer nights, and just there was something so cosmic about being there that was somehow different than just going for a walk at night somewhere else, because there's something about the presence and the power of these Vastu buildings that create this aura of strength and safety and royalty almost. I mean, it's not like there are palaces there, but there's this quality of royalness that exists in the collection of Vastu homes. So I would experience that, the collection of these Vastu homes. And on the level of people community, definitely what Ali was saying, there's this nurturing element of the people who live there, and this element of village. It really feels like a village because, like Emily was saying, you go for a walk to the mailbox area and you run into somebody. It's kind of inevitable because people go for walks, and there's friendliness, there's sharing, there's openness. I feel like I could knock on any door and get help if I needed something. If I needed food, or if I needed a ride to the hospital or something, I think anyone in any one of those homes would take me if I really needed something. And what else? Yeah, I think so. I've lived in Fairfield all of my life, basically, other than some travels and some educational experiences. It's where I grew up. And I would say North Campus Village is the place in Fairfield to live, hands down, for the vibe and the atmosphere and the people. And the skyline is so clear. The night sky is so clear. The quality of royalness. Yeah, I'm quite enthusiastic about living in North Campus Village, and those are a few words to express it.
Beautiful. Emily, you had once mentioned how before you lived in Vastu, when your husband went out of town, you felt a bit of fearfulness at night, being at home alone. And can you talk about that story?
Well, yes. And it was even before I was married. I lived alone for many years, and I was in big cities, and you kind of get a different sense of how to, you're very aware of your environment, and to be careful and to watch out. And there was a bit of an unease always about safety. And moving to Fairfield really helped it because we are a small town, but moving into Vastu really soothed it. There's just something about feeling protected and feeling this nourishment, and it's some level. I noticed that right away. I just feel an inner protection, inner safety, and yeah, so that is a big plus. But I also wanted to add that what Luke said about the community and how we do take care of one another. It's amazing. Meal trains and helping each other and sharing plants. And if anybody has too many tomatoes, they just post it up. We have a chat board, and they say, come get tomatoes on my property, or and we're getting more so as we get bigger. We're just starting to do all sorts of things as a community and for the community, because that's what a community is about. We feel that way.
Yeah, I think in modern living, there's very few places where there is such a strong feeling of community.
Mm.
And Fairfield, as a town, has it more so. And then when you're in any of the Vastu villages, because there's also Mandala One and Walton Lake, and there's numerous Vastu communities in Fairfield, and each of those, there naturally is a sense of unity that the Vastu promotes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think everyone who lives in a Vastu community feels that. And it's a very special benefit that we get to enjoy.
Yeah, it's an important one, especially at this time. I know many times we would say that we're so fortunate, when there's people that are in New York and can't go out, or you know, it just, I just was so grateful that we still, you know, we can take walks here. We have trails, we have, you know, a great environment to be in, and still we can hunker down when we have to. So,
Right next to North Campus Village is an entrance to a citywide trail that people can walk and bike on, and it encircles the entire town. And if you walk on that trail, you inevitably meet and make new friends.
Let me ask the three speakers, as you've been sitting listening as one of the other speakers have spoken, has anything come to your mind that you thought of that you would like to share?
I could share on the point Emily brought up about the safety of living in North Campus Village. Of course, it's a slightly heavier topic than I often even think about, but I have lived in bigger cities. I spent 2 years living basically alone in the south side of Chicago while I was in school there. And after moving to Fairfield, in general, I felt much safer. But of course, everywhere there is still crime or just bad things can happen. And I don't want to think about that. But I've noticed that living in North Campus Village, I feel completely safe because there are so many wonderful people around. And in fact, I kind of laugh if I see police coming through and patrolling the neighborhood just on their usual rounds, because I'm like, why would they come in here? I always chuckle to myself when I see that. But it feels very safe. It feels very nourishing, as both of you said. And the comfort, just the comfort and settled feeling of living in North Campus is amazing. It's the best place I've lived so far in my life. So I'm happy with it.
May I mention the reason you might have seen a police car is here is because one of them lived here. He and his family, a young policeman, just lived down the street.
I have something more to add to complete some of my story and sharing with experience of living in Vastu. I ended up working at from home a lot this year, as did a lot of people in the world. And I found the experience of working from home in my Vastu home to be immensely energizing and productive. And what stood out to me was the ability to be of high focus for long hours and enjoying. That was something new to me, at least at that level, that I could basically work all day, including like late hours at night, which I'm not usually used to being able to do. It was my work called for it. And I was able to work all day and basically late at night with this level of clarity as if it was the middle of the day. That was incredible. The amount that I could get done, being able to work that number of hours with that level of clarity and that much enjoyment of the process day after day was phenomenal. So I wanted to share that for anyone who would be working from home, that I think it's really a superpower to do your work from Vastu.
That's great, Luke, because then instead of feeling trapped in your home, you felt like you were extra productive from working at home.
I was more free being trapped at home, so to speak, because I wasn't trapped at home, like you said.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, that was such a beautiful peek into life living in a Vastu community, and within that community living in a Vastu home. I want to thank everyone for your interest in Maharishi Vastu architecture, which enhances peace and happiness in life. Goodbye for now.